Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. CEO follows employee working double shifts and ordering food from home, he's shocked to discover. In the immaculate offices of the headquarters of North Cross Solutions, housed in a glass tower overlooking downtown Chicago, the silence was broken only by the discreet hum of printers and the clicking of keyboards. Everything was clean, precise, calibrated. Nothing was sticking out. And on the upper floor, behind tinted glass walls, Jonathan Reed, 48 years old, CEO of the company, observed as every Monday morning the weekly staff productivity reports. Jonathan was a man of numbers, results, and optimization. A Harvard graduate in economics and strategic management, he ran his company like a well-oiled machine. He knew the average cost of a shift down to the minute, the profitability per package, the productivity loss of an extended break, but he didn't know the faces or stories of those who kept his warehouses running. He didn't feel the need to. Sitting in his leather armchair, he skimmed the charts on his ultra-thin touchscreen. Nothing surprised him: stable trends, a few predictable delays, and spikes in activity linked to the end of the quarter. Until a name appears repeatedly, underlined in yellow by an HR analyst. Mariah Bennett, 29 years old. Temporary employee. Southside Distribution Center. Jonathan clicked on it. With a simple gesture, he brought up his time-scoring history. 12 o'clock. 2 o'clock. 4 o'clock. 5, sometimes 6 days a week. 0 absences. 0 lateness. No reports. He narrowed his eyes. Is this a system error? Sun Assistant Personnel, Thomas Ellis, a young, dynamic executive with a constantly ironed shirt, shook his head. No, sir. That's correct. She works double shifts almost every day. She's fast, efficient, but very discreet. No incidents have been reported since she was hired. And no one told me about it before? Well, she's never asked for a promotion. She even refuses the extra breaks she's been offered. You could say she's deliberately keeping a low profile. She keeps her distance from the rest of the team. Jonathan remained silent. A 29-year-old woman, temporary, with no apparent ambition, but who literally kills herself working without ever failing. This wasn't common. This deviated from the typical profile. He clicked again. Another detail caught his attention. Is she using our internal delivery system? He asked, frowning. Yes, sir. But she pays for all her packages with her own card. She sends food, essentials, to her personal home. It's not prohibited, of course. Many internal employees use it. Jonathan tapped his fingers on the desk. There was nothing illegal. No wrongful behavior. And yet, a diffuse unease was overcoming him. There was in this regularity a form of silent urgency, of contained tension. As if this woman, whom he had never met, wore a whole life on his shoulders, and that no one had noticed. In his head, the numbers blurred. A name had gone from data to human enigma. He whispered, almost to himself. It's not normal to keep up this pace without breaking down. Then, straightening up, his gaze more determined. Thomas, I want to know her schedule for this week. And discreetly find me a way to track the next delivery she sends to her house. Not to accuse her. To understand. The assistant hesitated, surprised. You mean, follow her personally? Jonathan crossed his arms. Exactly. In his gaze, there was no longer just the cold logic of the CEO. There was a glimmer of human concern, rare and unexpected. That day, without really knowing it, Jonathan Reed had just emerged from his ivory tower. The day after, without informing anyone, neither his department directors, nor even his faithful assistant Thomas, Jonathan Reed decided to act alone. He wanted to see. He had to see. He put on a dark coat, traded his luxury sedan for an unmarked vehicle from the internal fleet, and programmed the delivery address into the GPS, discreetly retrieved via the company's tracking system. It was almost 6 p.m. when the van loaded with the package of Mariah Bennett left the distribution center of Southside. Jonathan followed her at a good distance, guided by a mixture of instinct, guilt, and something he hadn't felt in a long time, of raw humanity. The city was changing around him. The wide, tree-lined avenues were giving way to narrower streets with cracked sidewalks. Welcome to West Englewood, one of Chicago's most deprived neighborhoods. Where grass grew between the cracks in the concrete, where "for sale" signs remained planted for years in front of tired houses, and where poverty didn't scream, she survived in silence. Jonathan drove slowly, his hands clenched on the steering wheel. He had never set foot in this part of town. This wasn't his world. It wasn't even a map he was consulting. It was another universe. One he had always flown over, from very high above. The van finally stopped in front of Asmal wooden house, at the end of a rutted driveway. The shutters were peeling, the porch steps creaked visibly. A pale light filtered through the kitchen window. In a neighboring yard, a starving dog barked at an unseen passerby. Jonathan turned off the engine and watched. Mariah came out a few moments later. Still in uniform. Her gray jacket bore the marks of a long day's work, thin black streaks of dust, deep creases. She moved slowly, almost floating. Yet, a shy smile lit up his face, as if simply holding that cardboard brought him respite. She grabbed the package, pressed it to her chest, and then turned back toward the house. Just before opening the door, she paused for a moment. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath. Andre composed his smile, a deliberate smile. The kind we keep to protect others. Jonathan felt a strange pang deep in his chest. He got out of the vehicle without thinking. He crossed the street slowly, his step hesitant. Inexplicable impulse was pushing him. It was no longer mere curiosity. It was as if he had to see what happened next, as a silent witness to what he had never wanted to face. Approaching within a few meters, he glanced through a half-open window. Inside, the scene hit him like a shock. 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, were sitting around a wobbly table, their elbows resting on notebooks and colored pencils. One of them was wearing an oversized sweatshirt with a hole in the elbow. The girl was coughing softly, a cuddly toy against her. Mariah knelt down on the floor, right on the worn linoleum, and opened the package. She took out a packet of rice, a can of beans, a small bag of frozen vegetables. With infinite gentleness, she began to prepare simple plates for them. No luxuries. No frills. Just what's necessary. But every gesture breathed a deep, silent love, a total commitment to offering them a minimum of stability in an unstable world. Jonathan felt his eyes sting. He wasn't used to this kind of pain. This kind of naked truth. He approached, then knocked on the door. A brief moment of silence. Then footsteps. A rustling. The door opened a crack. Mariah appeared in the doorway, frozen, her eyes wide. She was no longer wearing her smile. She was surprised. No, petrified. Mr. Reed. She stammered, her voice barely audible. He slowly took off his cap, as if apologetically. His tone was almost humble. Hello, Mariah. I'm sorry to come here like this. I saw your name in the reports, and I wanted to understand. Understand how you were doing all this. Why you were disappearing. And why you were sending each other these packages. She didn't answer right away. Her gaze was shifty. It seemed as if she were seeking shelter in her own doorway. He read in her eyes the fear of having done wrong, the shame of being seen, the fatigue that she could no longer hide. I'm not here to judge you, he added softly. She opened the door a little wider. Come in, she finally whispered, her voice fragile. Jonathan entered the small living room, and immediately, the contrast with his world struck his senses. The pale walls, peeling in places, were covered with children's drawings taped at eye level. Clumsy suns, houses with red roofs, stick figures with huge smiles. The kind of drawings you proudly give to those you love when all you have are crayons and hope. A smell of cheap laundry detergent floated in the air, mixed with that of the rice cooking in the kitchen. It was clean, modest, but above all alive. On a threadbare sofa, covered with a faded blanket, were placed geared school notebooks, pens without caps, a box of broken chalks. Jonathan didn't dare sit down. He remained standing, slightly stiff, uncomfortable in this setting that wasn't his own, yet which touched him far more than all the conference rooms he had ever passed through. Mariah closed the door behind him. She didn't offer him coffee. She had nothing to hide behind politeness. She leaned against the wall and spoke in a calm, low, almost mechanical voice. She had told this story before, but rarely out loud. And never to a man in a multi-thousand-dollar suit. "These children are my nephews," she said bluntly. She gestured discreetly to the two boys playing on their stomachs with figurines, and to the little girl drawing with her tongue between her lips. "Their mother, my sister Tasha, died 10 months ago. Pancreatic cancer. Devastating. She wasn't even 34. We learned the diagnosis in May. She passed away in July." She paused. Jonathan froze. She continued. "Their father? In prison. Trafficking, domestic violence, he was never reliable. So when my sister fell ill, I took charge. I didn't hesitate. I took them in. They're my children now." She smiled briefly at the little girl, who looked up at her confidently before returning to her drawing. "I had to drop out of college. I was a few credits away from completing a degree in accounting. But what do you do when you have 3 children crying at night? You have to make school lunches, pay bills, and answer social services calls." She wasn't crying. Her voice wasn't trembling. She had moved beyond fatigue, fear, even shame. What remained was a naked, silent determination, solid as cement. "So I work. As much as possible. Sometimes I only sleep 3 hours. But I have to stock the fridge. I have to keep the electricity on. I have to pay the school fees, buy shoes, paper, medicine." She sighed, and her gaze wandered for a moment. "And on weekends, when the supermarkets are too far away or I can't afford to take a bus, I use our logistics platform. I get whatever I can afford delivered to my home. Rice, canned goods, milk. Nothing fancy. Just enough to last." Then she looked down. For the first time, her voice wavered. "I know it's not the intended use. But I've never stolen anything. I never meant to break the rules. I just do what I can. What I must." A heavy silence fell. The sound of the creaking radiator, the distant laughter of a child outside, the rustling of a pencil on paper, all of it suddenly seemed to take up more space. Jonathan swallowed. He wasn't prepared for this. He had thought he had come to check a detail, an anomaly in an Excel sheet. He discovered the daily life of sacrifices, a young woman who, in the shadows, carried a burden that few men, and even fewer powerful men, would have had the courage to lift. He watched Mariah and felt little. Not in size, nor in status, but in human truth. She had no completed degree, no network of influence, no savings account. But she was standing. And she was holding on. 3 children with her. He inhaled slowly. "I didn't know," he finally whispered. "I didn't know what you were going through. Thank you for telling me." Their eyes met. There was no more hierarchy. No more suits. No more glass walls. There was only 2 human beings, in a room that is too small, but where dignity took over. Back to headquarters, Jonathan Reed doesn't say a word to anyone. He crossed the vast marble hall of the headquarters of North Cross Solutions without noticing the greetings from the employees. Usually, he walked with a firm, precise step, always one step ahead of the others. That evening, it just seemed, slowed down, as if something fundamental in him had given way. Arriving in his office on the top floor, he sat down in his armchair, turned off the lights and stood there, facing the bay window, observing the city without really seeing it. The view, though spectacular over the Chicago skyline, was no longer enough to flatter his ego. He thought back to Mariah's house. To the children's drawings. To their simple plates. To that woman's courageous silence. He had spent years believing that businesses were built on forecasts, numbers, growth rates, mathematical models. But this woman, invisible on his charts, had shaken his entire mental architecture. He thought back to a sentence Mariah had said almost mechanically. "I just do what I can. What I have to." These words turned in his mind like a prayer. He had seen more than leadership in her than many vice presidents to whom he had offered stock options. The weekend passed. But he hardly slept. And when the Monday morning arrived, Jonathan entered the conference room with a new energy, a brutal clarity in the gaze. He summoned exceptional meeting, without agenda, with human resources managers, warehouse managers, social policy managers, and even union representatives. Everyone was there. Some curious, others worried. Jonathan wasn't known for emotional speeches. Even less so for improvisation. He stood up, without notes. And he spoke. "Last week, I met one of our employees. Her name is Mariah Bennett." A quiet murmur ran through the room. Few of them knew who he was talking about. "She's temporary. Silent. She works in our South Side warehouse. She raised 3 children alone who aren't hers. She works double shifts, almost every day, and uses our delivery system to feed her family. She's never asked for anything. She's never asked for a favor. And yet, she's living proof that our company is built on invisible human pillars." He paused. His gaze swept the room. "What I saw opened my eyes. I understood one thing: the numbers don't tell the whole story. It's not algorithms that load packages. It's not statistics that prepare orders in the rain, or that keep smiling despite the misery. It's people. Women. Men. Mariah's." A heavy silence fell. No one moved. Then he announced. "Starting today, we are launching a priority support program for our most vulnerable employees. All those who have dependent children and income below a certain threshold will be entitled to free meals for their children, to a childcare assistance, to AEAZ access to safe and subsidized come to work." An HR manager shyly raised his hand. "Mr. Reed, this is going to be expensive." Jonathan stared at him without anger. What costs a lot is letting people collapse in silence. What costs a lot is losing the soul of a company. "I don't just want a profitable company. I want a company worthy." Then he concludes. "I also want us to identify all employees as Mariah. All those who give without counting, without ever asking. And I want them to finally offers the stability they deserve. Fixed contracts. Training. Support. We won't build the future with quarterly profits. We will build it with recognition." No one spoke for several seconds. Then, slowly, heads nodded. Some executives looked down, ashamed that they had never seen what Jonathan had seen. Others, younger, smiled with hope. That day, in that room with its cold, white walls, something happened. A CEO had changed. And with him, an entire company was beginning to transform. A week later, in the large glass amphitheater of the headquarters of North Cross Solutions, decorated in the company colors, stood the annual meeting, the most anticipated of the year. More than 600 employees, managers, investors, partners and members of the trade press were present. The decor was simple but elegant: a large black stage, warm lights, LED panels showing quarterly results and future projections. But this year, something new was in the air. A rumor was circulating. The CEO was going to give a different speech. More personal. At 10 o'clock sharp, Jonathan Reed took the stage, wearing a midnight blue suit, without a tie. He held neither a teleprompter nor an index card. He stood in front of the lectern. His voice, clear and calm, echoed through the amphitheater. Before talking about results, objectives, or growth, I would like to tell you about a meeting. Silence fell immediately. People were listening to him. Last week, I visited a neighborhood I didn't know. I walked through the door of a modest house. And there I met a woman whose dignity, courage, and strength overwhelmed me. He paused. His gaze shifted to the back of the room. Her name is Mariah Bennett. She's a logistics operator at our South Side facility. For nearly a year, she's been working double shifts without a single complaint. She's raised 3 children who aren't her own. She gave up her dreams to save them from social services. And yet, she's remained invisible to us. In the crowd, Mariah lowered her head, her hands clenched in her lap. She was sitting in the back row, surrounded by colleagues who suddenly looked at her differently. Mariah never asked for an award. She never raised her hand to show off. She simply did what was necessary. Day after day. Quietly. Without light. With the silent endurance of true heroes. A shudder ran through the room. Today, I want to write an oversight. And I want it to mark a turning point for our corporate culture. He gestured discreetly toward the organizing team. The spotlight swung toward the back of the room, where Mariah was now illuminated by a soft beam. An employee approached her and extended her hand to invite her upstairs. First of all, Mariah hesitated. She shook her head slightly, as if to say, I can't. Then she saw the looks. Sincere encouragement. Respect. Benevolent curiosity. And she stood up, his legs a little shaky, and slowly crossed the central aisle, to applause. Some stood up. Others discreetly took out their phones to capture the moment. When she went on stage, her hands were sweaty, her heart was beating so hard she could feel it in her ears. Jonathan greeted him with a warm smile. He wasn't playing a role. He was deeply moved. He took an envelope from his inside jacket pocket and handed it to her. Mariah, here your new contract. She took it, her fingers trembling. I am proud to announce that you become today Southside Center Assistant Supervisor, with a permanent contract, a doubling of salary, and, because your children deserve the same opportunities as others, a full scholarship to cover their tuition through university. The room erupted in applause. A genuine thunder, standing ovations erupted on the right, then on the left, some had tears in their eyes. Executives, usually so rigid, smiled broadly. Mariah, however, remained frozen. The tears fell without her feeling them coming. Not sobs. Not grief. An outpouring of relief, gratitude, and newfound dignity. She whispered into the microphone that was being held out. I've never done anything extraordinary. His voice was barely audible. Jonathan turned to her. Exactly, he replied calmly, looking around the room, it is those who fight without light, without recognition, without respite, who deserve to have their path finally illuminated. And that day, under the spotlight of a corporate world that is often too cold, the light had fallen on an ordinary woman with an extraordinary heart. Months later, long after the applause, the press articles and the tears shared on stage, something had changed, in depth, within Northcross Solutions. This was not a simple strategic evolution. It was a human molt. In the corridors of headquarters, once cold and silent, children's laughter could now be heard on family days. Employees spoke more openly, managers greeted warehouse workers by their first names. Group meals were organized, listening sessions were organized, and time was given to take care, not just of productivity, but people. And above all, an announcement had a lasting impact on the company's culture, the creation of the Fonds Mariah Bennett, an internal aid program dedicated to employees in precarious situations or in family crisis. This fund, financed both by the company and by voluntary donations from staff and partners, offered emergency aid for housing and care, medical or school fees, exceptional paid leave for the family caregivers or victims of violence, psychological and legal support confidential, and above all, human recognition, personalized, far from impersonal forms. Jonathan Reed, formerly rigid, almost mechanical CEO, had changed. He was no longer the same man. Those who had known him before spoke of a look that had become softer, of a less dry tone, of a man who had learned to listen before deciding. At the official launch of the fund, he declared in front of the cameras. For years, I believed that an Excel spreadsheet could tell me everything I needed to know. I was wrong. What I didn't see was that the heart of a company doesn't beat in numbers. It beats in the chests of those we don't see. Those who arrive before everyone else, leave after everyone else, and never complain. This fund is not a tribute. It's a promise. A promise to never turn a blind eye again. The name, Fonds Mariah Bennett, was inscribed in sober letters on a plaque at the entrance to the headquarters, below a now famous quote from Mariah. "I'm just doing what I can. What I have to." In the South Side warehouses, employees testified that Mariah, now assistant supervisor, greeted them every morning with the same modesty, but with a light in his eyes which many found contagious. She hadn't changed her posture. But she walked straighter, as if, finally, the world recognized the weight she had carried alone for too long. She continued to make her rounds, helping new recruits, and offering more flexible hours for single mothers. And in the evening, when she came home the same house in West Englewood, having become a little more comfortable thanks to her new salary, she was still preparing rice and beans, but with slightly better ingredients, and above all, with less fear of tomorrow. In the months, then years that followed, Mariah Bennett's story was told in training seminars, in business schools, in conferences on human leadership. We were no longer just talking about productivity, but of dignity at work, of social justice, of structural benevolence. And in the corridors of Northcross, it was whispered that the company had found its soul again. Not through fundraising. Not through a merger. But thanks to an invisible woman, who, in silence, had done what many did not even dare to imagine. To stand up when everything was falling apart, and reach out to others, even when exhausted.